Of all the cities in history, everything in this story leads to Chicago this year. 1933. Chicago commands the American interior through rail, grain, meat, and steel. Under Edward J. Kelly, wealth, labor, hunger, and spectacle converge in one rare hour. With AI, we rebuild that lost city in motion, depth, and living scale this year. Not just a view of the past, but a direct walk into Chicago as it truly was then. This is a city of smoke, stone, and motion, caught between collapse and invention. The Great Depression cuts deep, yet Chicago still moves like a machine under strain. By 1933, unemployment in the city reaches roughly half the labor force that year. Even so, more than 3 million people keep this lakefront giant in motion that year. Freight trains still arrive, bridges still lift, and the river still carries work. At street level, though, survival shows in coat cuffs, bread lines, and lowered eyes. The Loop rises first, a canyon of limestone, steel, and darkened office windows. Elevated trains scrape overhead, shaking sparks and shadows across the streets below. Clerks hurry under awnings, collars raised against the wind off Lake Michigan that year. Secretaries step around puddles, while newsboys shout layoffs and relief headlines. On State Street, bright windows glow with goods many families cannot now afford. Hats, shoes, radios, gloves, and silverware gleam behind glass like old promises. Men pause at corners to read of strikes, closures, and rumors of bank trouble that year. Chicago learns its mood each morning in black ink, cold air, and hard numbers that year. Listen closely, and the city sounds layered, metallic, busy, and privately afraid. Train wheels scream above, taxi horns answer below, and footsteps bind both worlds. A river bridge slams upward, freezing traffic while a freighter noses through that year. Steam leaks from grates, and the smell of coal hangs low in the cold wind that year. The skyline still advertises confidence, but the sidewalks tell a harsher truth. Some men walk fast because they have work to reach before the whistle sounds that year. Others walk just as fast because stopping might reveal they have nowhere to go that year. A city this large can hide unemployment inside motion for only so long that year. Soon the evidence appears in lines outside missions, relief stations, and kitchens. Caps pulled low, shoulders bent, men wait with a silence older than the hour that year. Their shoes are white at the seams, their coats worn thin by too many winters that year. A few hold folded references or addresses that promise another try tomorrow that year. No one here performs hunger for effect, and that makes the scene more severe that year. In Chicago, poverty gathers quietly, then settles into routine with hard discipline. Under viaducts and near freight yards, rough camps rise from scrap wood and canvas. Blankets become walls, newspapers become insulation, and salvaged boards a doorway. The city calls these places jungles, as if a label could soften the damage that year. Yet even here, routine survives, because routine is one shield poverty rarely steals. Coffee heats in dented cans, faces are washed in cold water, collars are brushed. People rebuild themselves each dawn before trying to re-enter the official city that year. Chicago is wounded, but it still bargains, hauls, prints, repairs, and argues that year. Mothers inspect prices with patience, measuring supper against coins in gloved hands. Children stare at fruit stands and learn early that wanting something proves nothing. Inside lunch counters, steam fogs windows as soup passes warm from hand to hand. On Maxwell Street, bargaining becomes a local art sharpened by necessity and pride. Repaired shoes, second-hand coats, lamps, tools, and crockery change owners by dusk. Nothing is wasted when money is scarce, and need is always 1 week ahead that year. Chicago has long known how to turn leftovers into commerce and survival into rhythm. Immigrant blocks carry that discipline street by street, kitchen by kitchen, tongue by tongue. Polish, Italian, Jewish, Irish, Greek and Bohemian families keep the avenues alive. Laundry lines cross alleys, bakeries breathe warmth, and radios leak dance music. Children play on stoops while adults track rent, weather, and rumors of work that year. Even in hardship, the city remains 1,000 small worlds pressed together that year. On the south side, Bronzeville carries another map of pressure, memory, and ambition. Jazz slips from doorways while migration reshapes blocks already strained by segregation. New arrivals from the South bring skill, faith, memory, and a wider horizon that year. Yet opportunity is rationed by color as sharply as cash is rationed by the crash. Barbershops, beauty parlors, churches, and newspapers become engines of news and survival. In the Black Belt, overcrowding turns old housing into a daily test of endurance. Apartments meant for fewer people now hold whole families behind tired brick walls. Shared bathrooms, weak plumbing, and poor sanitation make poverty feel dangerously physical. Here, Chicago does not simply suffer the depression, it breathes it room by room. In this town, politics is never abstract. It is coal by January and bread by Friday. Landlords wait at tenement doors with ledgers and patient pressure in their hands. Rent day hangs over stairwells like weather, shaping every purchase made downstairs. South of downtown, the industrial edge reveals another face of the same decade that year. Rail yards knot together like iron roots feeding factories, warehouses, and stockyards. Freight cars arrive with grain, lumber, coal, and unfinished business from inland America. Smoke thickens here, streets widen, and labor becomes visible in backs and gate. Men shoulder cargo, guide trucks, push carts, and feed the inland empire by force. Chicago's power has long depended on movement, from lake to rail and farm to table. That system still works in the 1930s, but now it works under brutal strain that year. A metropolis built to process abundance must now explain scarcity to its own people. At hiring gates and union halls, men gather before dawn in disciplined clusters. Some are called inside for a shift. Many are told to come back tomorrow that year. Tomorrow becomes a way to postpone humiliation without ever defeating it that year. Yet the elevated trains keep circling, binding neighborhoods into one metallic pulse. Passengers sway beneath leather straps, lunch pails on knees, newspapers folded tight. From the windows they watch rooftops, smokestacks, church domes, and chimneyed alleys. It is a moving balcony over a city both magnificent and painfully overburdened that year. Below, traffic inches past theaters, pharmacies, tailors, taverns, and cigar shops. Prohibition is ending, but the need for escape has not ended with the law that year. In bars, laughter can sound too loud, as if volume alone could resist reality that year. Beer foams into thick glasses while talk drifts toward baseball, politics, and debt. For 1 hour, warmth and companionship can imitate security well enough to matter. Then the door opens, lake wind enters, and Chicago resumes its harder talk that year. Noon light strikes the banks, whose marble fronts still promise order and permanence. But panic has taught the city that stone can look eternal while trust vanishes that year. That lesson lingers in the way passers-by glance at institutions, then keep walking. The Depression changes more than income. It alters tempo, posture, and public weather. A city famous for swagger now speaks in smaller plans and tighter units of hope. Still, pride survives in polished shoes, brushed lapels, and hats set with care. Men straighten ties before interviews they may never get, because dignity keeps rules. Women mend cuffs, re-sew buttons, and stretch wardrobes across winters never planned. Children inherit coats, textbooks, and the silence of adults protecting what remains. Chicago carries all of this in public, even while pretending not to notice that year. Then the lakefront opens, and the city remembers how to imagine past survival that year. Along the shore, A different Chicago begins to glow with light, glass, and color. The century of progress rises like a deliberate argument against despair itself. Its buildings are sleek, bright, modern, and startling beside the older city inland. Here, science is staged as hope, and industry dresses itself in electric optimism. At night, the fair turns the lakefront into a theater of illumination and motion. Neon trembles on dark water, searchlights sweep upward, and crowds move with wonder. For a few hours, Chicago stops rehearsing loss and starts performing possibility. Exhibits promise cleaner homes, faster travel, stronger materials, and a calmer future. The message is simple and potent. Progress has not died. It has been delayed that year. In the middle of national hardship, that promise feels almost radical that year. Visitors arrive in good coats and worn shoes, carrying fatigue and curiosity together. Children study machines as if invention itself might rescue the household budget. Adults examine kitchens, motors, and displays with practical, hungry attention that year. Chicago understands spectacle, but here, spectacle serves as civic medicine that year. The city tells itself that collapse is not the end of the story after all that year. That matters, because depression is not only economic, it is also a crisis of belief. The fair does not erase breadlines, layoffs, or overdue rent back in the flats that year, but it breaks the emotional monopoly of scarcity, and that break has force that year. After leaving the grounds, people return to trains, apartments, and unpaid accounts. Yet they return carrying images of a wider horizon than yesterday allowed that year. This, too, is Chicago in the 1930s. Not denial, but a fierce counterweight that year. The fair also reveals the limits of progress in a divided American city that year. Black Chicagoans push against exclusion and force anti-discrimination language for 1934. Even in a showcase of tomorrow, the struggle over who belongs remains urgent that year. Late afternoon lowers long shadows across trolley wires, signs, and wet pavement. Office lights click on, theaters ready their marquees, and restaurants reset tables. A man sells apples from a crate by the curb, formal as any shopkeeper that year. Another offers magazines to commuters leaving the station in patient repetition. Women carry parcels wrapped in brown paper, proof that some sales still close that year. Shoeshine stands work the final rush, brushes flashing under yellow electric bulbs. Street musicians test a tune by the stairs, hoping rhythm can become supper that year. Chicago has always rewarded improvisation, and the Depression makes it essential. Across brick neighborhoods, apartment windows begin glowing one by one at dusk that year. Inside them are boiled dinners, unpaid notices, homework, radio jokes, and budgeting. Someone darns socks near the stove while another studies tomorrow's classifieds. Someone else simply rests, grateful to have survived another unremarkable, hard day. History remembers crises through numbers, but cities endure through evenings like these. In church basements and union rooms, people exchange information and endurance that year. Who is hiring? Which landlord may wait? Where relief is offered? Who needs coal? This web of small knowledge keeps more people afloat than official speeches do that year. Community in Chicago is rarely sentimental. It is practical, coded, and urban that year. It lives in borrowed tools, shared meals, and news passed quietly from stoop to stoop. Night deepens, and the elevated trains become ribbons of lit windows in the dark. Downtown towers stand against the sky like monuments to an earlier confidence that year. Below them, janitors sweep lobbies, waitresses stack cups, and night crews clock in. The city changes shift, but never truly stops speaking in the language of work that year. Even in Depression, Chicago remains one of the great engines of the nation that year. It moves grain, meat, newsprint, freight, talent, and ambition through raw momentum. That momentum is slower now, burdened and uneven, but unmistakably alive that year. You can see it in the bridges, rails, markets, and stubborn river traffic that year. You can hear it in trains overhead and in voices that refuse surrender that year. This rare color glimpse restores more than buildings, cars, and vanished fashions. It restores temperature, texture, posture, and the choreography of daily survival. Black and white can make the past feel sealed behind museum glass, that year. Color returns the ache of brick, brass, skin, fabric, smoke, and winter light that year. It reminds us these were not symbols of hardship, but people inside an afternoon. They worried, hurried, joked, bargained, waited, and kept going because cities demand motion. Today, the fairgrounds are gone, yet the lakefront still carries that old promise. The lesson endures. Cities break, but people teach them how to rise again that year. Hard, proud, brilliant, wounded, and still in motion. Chicago never stood down that year. And in every restored color frame, that stubborn city walks straight back toward us. Stay with us for the next journey, because another lost city is waiting in color.